We welcome you once again to our discussions of the Scriptures of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Today we're continuing our discussion of the Book of Mormon. I'm Professor Terry Ball from the Department of Ancient Scripture at Brigham Young University, and joining me today are three of my colleagues. Seated next to me is Professor Gay Strather. I'm so glad to have you with us, Gay.
Thank you.
Also joining us today is Professor Paul Hoskison. Good to have you with us as always, Paul.
Good to be here.
And the third member of our discussion today is Professor Clyde Williams. Good to have you with us, Clyde. All right, we're going to begin with Chapter 8 of the Book of Mormon in our discussion today. The setting, Laman and Lemuel and Nephi have returned with Zoram and Ishmael's family, and they're all together in the valley of Lemuel by the river Laman. And God decides while they're there to give them some instruction, and does it with a wonderful vision. Just before having the vision, Nephi makes this observation in his record: "And it came to pass that we had gathered together all manner of seeds of every kind, both of grain of every kind, and also of seeds of fruit of every kind. They left their gold and their silver and everything else back home, but not the seeds." They're going to need that. When they get to the promised land, they're going to have to sustain themselves somehow, and it's going to be a lot easier, at least initially, to use and raise crops that they're familiar with. Eventually they'll shift over, if you carefully plot it out through the book, to vegetation that's indigenous to the new promised land as well. And then we find Lehi coming forth and saying, "Behold, I have dreamed a dream." That's an interesting way to say it. We'd say, "I had a dream." What's the significance of saying, "I dreamed a dream"?
Well, this is one of those Hebrew phrases that we've talked about in some of the other episodes. This one has a technical, a technical term is a cognate accusative, where the verb and the object of the verb are the same word, really. Once, and so you say a dream. This is very popular in all Semitic writing, both in Hebrew and in Babylonian and in Arabic too, but it's not very well liked in English. I think English teachers would mark you down for using a cognate accusative like this. There's a lot of it in the Book of Mormon throughout these sections.
So it's good evidence that really, in spite of the fact that we have an abridgment and a translation into English, some of these artifacts or relics of the original language still creep into the text and testify that it really is what Joseph Smith taught us it was, a translation from a record kept by people with ancient Near Eastern origins. So, Lehi calls his family together, tells them he's so worried about Laman and Lemuel because of this vision, and then he tells them about the vision.
Let me make a comment here about the language too. We have mentioned these Hebraisms and things from Semitic languages in the text, but in verse 4 we actually have something that's strictly English, has no counterpart in any ancient language. That's the word methought. Which tells you again that Joseph is really reaching for his vocabulary, because methought is a really ancient phrase in English. It stops being a live part of the language long before the King James Bible. You see it in Chaucer and some of the Middle English writers, but it persists in English as a frozen form, and people don't understand what it means. And people sometimes read this passage and say, "Oh, that's just bad grammar." No, this is really good, older English. It occurs twice in the Book of Mormon, and I don't think it ever occurs in the King James Bible. So Joseph is reaching deep into vocabulary to produce this text.
So he's translating it. He comes across this term, and this is the best term he knows of to translate whatever it was that was written on the plates.
It's a little bit like the Greek Middle Voice. I don't want to be too technical here, but there's nothing like that in any of the Semitic languages. This is purely English that's coming through here.
Interesting. Very interesting. Maybe we ought to quickly just kind of summarize what Lehi saw in the vision. Clyde, do you want to give us a Reader's Digest condensed version of the vision?
Well, of course, he's going to be involved here with walking through a dreary waste and the experience of going through the world, and for many hours, perhaps reflective of the temptations of the world, which President Benson suggested. And then he's going to see the tree in a distance, and he'll see the river of water, and he'll see the rod of iron, and the path, and the spacious building, and the mist of darkness, and he'll see all of these symbols that have meaning and importance, and that really becomes a foundation upon any time, any period, not just Lehi's day, that you could plug ourselves into this dream and ask ourselves, so where am I in the midst of all of this symbolism that he sees?
he doesn't spend a lot of time interpreting it for his sons, which is obvious because Nephi is going to have to pray and get his own revelation to understand it. But what do you suppose Lehi was really hoping Laman and Lemuel and that we would get out of his telling of this vision?
I think it's important to get some of the main points and the structure of this down a little bit. He begins it at the end of verse 4 by saying, I saw in my dream a dark and dreary wilderness. This is setting the stage for the whole thing, because it opens up as a dark and dreary wilderness. But before all of that, he passes into the dark and dreary wilderness. A man comes to him in a white robe and says, follow me. And as he follows him, he finds himself in that dark and dreary waste, as it says at the end of 7. But the man's no longer there.
And now he's there for many hours.
And he's there for a long time in verse 8. And the only way to get out of this darkness is to pray. And that's going to be a really significant teaching that Lehi wants to get across. And I suspect that Laman and Lemuel were supposed to get the message. We don't know if they ever did. But if you're in darkness, you got to pray. That's the only way to get out. And when he prays, then he realizes in verse 9 that he's in this large and spacious field. This probably represents mortality. He's passed into the dark and dreary waste, mortality, and he can't see very well. He prays, and now he can begin to see the bigger picture of this spacious field. And he sees the tree now, and he sees the fruit, and goes there and partakes of it. Later on, of course, we'll learn what that is when we get over to the later sections where Nephi has his vision. And then he wants, because it's so wonderful, he wants his family to partake. So he looks around, and from the tree, he can see the family. First, of course, he sees Nephi and Sam and his wife, and beckons them to come, and they do. And then he sees Laman and Lemuel, and they're way off in the field, and they're not coming. And then he notices in verse 20 and 19, the rod of iron and the straight path, and they all lead away from, it's going away from the tree. And he looks way out there, beyond all of that, beyond the fountain, and he sees a large and spacious field as if it had been a world. So this is a different large and spacious place than the one that he found himself in the beginning, where he'd been conducted to by the man in white. And what he sees there are a lot of people trying to get from that place, which is like a world, to the spacious field that he had traversed to get to the tree. And along the way, and they want to get a hold of the rod, they want to take the path, and along the way arose a mist of darkness in 23, so they can't see where they're going. The only way you're going to get to the tree is to grab a hold of the rod, follow the path. And then some people make it
for Laman and Lemuel too.
It's a message for Laman and Lemuel. And some people grab the rod, some hang on, some don't, some make it to the tree, some make it to the tree and fall away, some make it to the tree and stay. And some people never get the rod. They're out wandering in the midst of darkness. They never pray, they never get out of darkness. And then, of course, some of them make it to the spacious building in verse 26. And we'll learn later on what that represents about the world. But I think there's a bottom line message here about us too, how we fit into this dream of the world and the preexistence and how we're trying to get to the tree. And I've heard Clyde talk about this, so I want to hear him say it again. What are these people that make it? Some make it to the tree and some don't, and some fall away. And